The truth of life is in the silence. The truth of life is in the silence. The answer to all questions is in the silence. True nourishment is in the silence. Protection, safety, security, love, it's in the silence. Everything that is longed for is in the silence. And the silence is the true nature of all beings. The silence is where the sameness, the oneness is. The same one being that all beings innately belong to. The silence is rich, rich with its own fullness. Silence has no opposite. Silence is pure truth. Where there is pure truth, there is no other way, no other possibility. It's not an either or. It's not silence or. When silence is truly discovered, there is nothing else. It is the silent self, the self of all, and the self alone is, just is. It is wholeness, divine wholeness. To long for nothing other than the silence, to be consumed by the silence into silent knowing. That it is not a state, it is not an experience, it is the greatest profundity. To know the silence is to know yourself, is to be truly and deeply nourished by your very own nature. It is the illumination that illuminates all appearance. Everything arises out of silence and dissolves back into silence. There is nothing else other than silence, just being, simply being. These words are silence. The mind's interpretation is a surface level interpretation. And so the invitation is to receive from your whole self, to listen without a listener, receive without anyone receiving. True receiving is an open surrender to everything, a complete and utter surrender to everything. And this depth of surrender just happens when there is a willingness to truly receive. True receptivity is a complete letting go of wanting, needing, desiring, evaluating, judging, holding opinion, all of the protective habits that keep you separate from yourself. You cannot do letting go, but you can be here so fully, aware of all the possible ways that the me distracts and protects. And shine the light, shine the aware light of the silent being that you are upon all of the ways that protection comes in, all of the ways that the mind tries to trick itself and gets entangled within its own mechanism. It is to be the illuminated principle, the light of awareness that is shining upon every single habit in order to illuminate so that those habits cannot pull you away from the deep, clear, and profound truth of the silence that you are, the silence that just is, the deep, resounding silence that just is. It is to be here so fully and watch as possible distractions try to pull the attention, and to say no to habit and yes to silence. All that is longed for is the silence. We could say everything that the mind would think is boring is the absolute richness, the richness of true life. The secret of life is in the silence. All answers are in the silence. So it is to see the one that wants, the one that needs, the one that wants to be constantly entertained. Because what you can be sure of is that if you want to be constantly entertained, life will constantly entertain you. And you will call it suffering. You will call it challenge. But that constant happening on the surface is happening because there is a need to be constantly entertained. You are asking for content. So grace, silence says, you want content? Here's content. And then the mind complains and says, oh, but not that. Not that. I want good content. I want juicy content that brings me pleasure, makes me feel happy. But that kind of content, that kind of content that the me desires is always going to be cycling, is always going to be cycling around aversion and attachment, pain and pleasure. It's a cycle of misery. Where there's want, where there's a wanting to be entertained, a wanting to have a story, right? The me wants to be the star of the movie. The mind can say, no, that's not true. I actually just want freedom. But you see, underneath what the mind says it wants, truth is playing out. Truth is playing out. You are getting exactly what you are longing for. So you cannot hide. This is a truth that you cannot hide from. The surface of life is the exact expression. It's like life is hanging out your dirty laundry for the whole world to see. Just what the me doesn't want. It's hanging it all out on the line. Because that is what the me wants. The me loves drama. The me loves a story. The me loves to be the star of my drama and then talk about my drama to as many people as will listen, right? So it's just to see that the me wants to be entertained. It wants to fill the space with things, to hold the aware light that sees this. Because where there is a wanting for the space to be filled, it will be filled. And it will be filled with a life that is reflecting your consciousness, not because you've done something wrong. No, because love loves you so completely that it wants to bring everything to the surface so that you can see through the illusion of wanting to be entertained, wanting to be filled with things. It brings everything to the surface so that all that can tempt you, all that seems alluring in the play of life, it can be seen through, it can be illuminated, and it can therefore no longer rob you from what is truly and deeply longed for. Because what is truly and deeply longed for is to live this abiding truth, is to know the silence, to be the silence, and to live this silent truth. And it's nothing that the mind can imagine. It's nothing that the mind can imagine. That is why there is a quality of surrender into true being. You cannot plan it, set it up, make it all comfy, like preparing a new home. You cannot prepare it, and then when it's all just right, then you say, okay, now I'm ready to move, because now I'm going to be comfortable. Now I've got hot running water. I've got everything that I need, right? It's not like that. You have to swim away from the edge of the pool, swim away from the shore, jump in and not know what is going to happen. This is true surrender. It's coming to a moment, and that is this moment here now, a moment of complete and utter not knowing, where there is such a profound letting go of everything that is known to the mind. It is to come to such a profound moment of not knowing that surrender happens all by itself, and you have left behind the person and the false ideas of security and love and truth, and you have fallen into the vast cavern of silent being. And you cannot do this. You cannot do it. You cannot control it. It is a moment of complete and utter loss of control, giving up of control that carries you into something so profound. Everything that is longed for, fulfillment, true, deep satiation, wholeness, the perfection of being the true being that you are. The possibility, the open possibility of knowing yourself and being carried all the way into the finer and finer values of yourself, falling into the profundity of who you truly are. So to swim away from the shore of certainty that the mind enjoys, to swim away from the shore of that which I know, that which is familiar, that which brings a quality of suffering, and yet I would rather continue with that suffering than step into something that I do not know. Essentially, there is no chooser. There is no one choosing. There is no one doing. You cannot do it right, and you cannot do it wrong. And that part is so profound to recognize, that you cannot do it wrong. You cannot do anything wrong, because you never have been the one that is doing. Everything is happening. It's being orchestrated out of your consciousness, yes. But you are not choosing that, because you are not separate from your consciousness. We could say your consciousness is not separate from pure consciousness. There is nothing here that is working independently. There's only one whole flow of consciousness, and it is born out of silent divine light, and it flows always as itself, never leaving itself. And so everything is conspiring for that knowing, that deep innate knowing, that essence knowing, the essence of who you are, to come right into recognition so that you can be living the essence of your true nature and not living in a misguided understanding that is not the full picture. It is not the fullness of divine reality that is right here, the totality, the wholeness, the incredible magnificence that is the glory is right here. And everything is conspiring to bring you into the silence of this moment, here now, before everything, before the first thought creates an illusion of separation and a false world that is believed by the mind to be real and true. It is a falling away from holding on to something that is not real, a holding on that something that, to be quite honest, you don't really want. And yet the habit is to hold on to it because it's familiar, and the mind throws up 1,000 and more reasons why you shouldn't leave this. But all of those reasons are nonsense. They're all nonsense. They're all just beliefs. They're all just ideas. People, roles, jobs, things. None of it matters. None of it matters. Even to find out that in truth, the ones that you feel are your nearest and dearest, it is the recognition that even those beings too, where they matter, where your loved ones matter, is where you are connected as the one being. The rest, the play of relationships, it doesn't matter. It does not matter in the way that the mind thinks it does. It's part of the trap. It's part of the illusion. As soon as you feel like you are one and there is an other, then you are in separation. So we are not talking about coming to a transcendent quality of living where we are not recognizing the beauty of that which appears, the immanent, right? But we are speaking about that the mind has an idea of what all this is, and it constantly finds ways to justify itself. It finds ways to justify itself, even in spiritual teachings, because it will interpret those teachings so that the mind can find a way to find a safe spot, a place where it sits and says, okay, no, this is okay because I have to stay here because this is embodied. I want to be embodied. I don't want to lose my embodiment. But the mind doesn't understand what embodiment is. It doesn't understand what integration is. It doesn't understand anything about this. It is in the surrender of the mind that true life gets to live itself so fully, where there's no one controlling, there's no one interpreting, there's no one trying to find a view where they feel safe and comfortable, like an easy chair. I found my spiritual easy chair And now I've got a view of the world, and now I'm feeling safe and spiritual, and this feels good. I feel good here, right? It's another part of the illusion. Just saying. There are so many ways the ego will find a way to feel safe. But safety, let's be honest, it's not all it's cracked up to be, because it's not real. It's not real safety. It's the mind's idea of safety. It's the mind justifying itself. It's the mind spinning itself a yarn, as they say, spinning itself a yarn and telling itself stories that keep it justified, when all that is deeply and truly longed for is to know the self and to be free of all of that. This moment here now, this moment, the fullness of this moment, the silence of this moment, the silence of this moment, the silence of simply being, the vast, infinite field of free, alive being. This is the truth that is longed for. Do not settle. Do not settle for illusory imitations of truth. Settle only for utter freedom. Do not rest. Do not rest until all questions have fallen away and the living truth of who you are is the silence. The living truth of who you are is the God nature that is only one, that is shining, shining, shining as wholeness, as divine wholeness, where the knowing of what you are is the knowing of what everything is. The knowing that is the complete and utter surrender into everything, allowing everything to be completely and utterly devoured until all that remains is the simplicity of the self, just shining, knowing itself, wildly alive as itself. And then let's talk about what embodiment and integration is, because they are not concepts for the mind to think they have to understand on a spiritual journey. Embodiment in truth is the divine wholeness living itself on the surface of life through a form that is its vehicle. You cannot avoid embodiment when you truly surrender all the way in to what is true. You cannot avoid integration when you are willing and open to receive everything equally, when you are willing and open to surrender equally to the whole play of your life that seems to be the world. The complete and utter surrender that is pure devotion, a devotion not to this and that, not a devotion only to this. It's a devotion to wholeness, devotion to the divine. It's the divine in devotion to itself, love in devotion to itself, that there is such a fullness of surrender, such a fullness of surrender that is not differentiating. It's just saying yes. It's saying yes to everything, recognizing that all of life is an invitation to let go more and more and more into the silence, into the wholeness, into the incredible flow of all that is, and be carried into the finer and finer, incredible, profound values of true nature. So do not settle. Do not settle for anything that the mind tells you, because it does not know. There is only one knowing that is true, and that is the simple knowing of yourself, just simply being here now. It is an alive resonance. It is a recognition. So as these words come, feel the resonance of recognition, your own true nature, the silent being that you are, starts to resonate and recognize truth, starts to recognize its true nature. And it resonates at whatever frequency, we could say, whatever divine frequency you have opened to. You will feel the fullness resonating alive. It might feel still and silent, unmoving, like a deep peace, or it might feel wildly alive and flowing and flowing and jumping with joy. It's all the same. It's all the same. You might feel an explosion of the heart that is just so full of love, loving itself, joy, jumping with joy, just because that is the true nature. Happiness that is swooning, a peace that is undisturbable. The true nature just is. It's causeless, effortless. It does not explain itself. It does not even know why. It does not even think to ask. Just is. It just is. And right here, underneath everything that is playing on the surface of life, everything that feels to be your life, this truth is here. This truth is the truth of who you are. It's the truth of who all beings are. And it is the only, we could say the only relationship that is pure, is where you feel the connection with all beings in the one being. It is to meet all beings in the silent gaze, the open-hearted gaze of simply being yourself. When you are being the one unconditioned being, there is nothing to turn away from. It is a complete and utter openness that is your true nature. You are gazing into yourself. You are gazing into your divine nature. You are gazing into the magnificent glory that you are. And there is nothing that would turn away. Nothing that would turn away, because there is nothing to keep you from yourself. You are so open to yourself. You are fearless and free, unconditioned life living itself, gazing right into your own heart, recognizing your own heart, its vastness, its unconditioned purity, its beauty, its shining, beaming light, knowing itself. We could say true darshan is to stare into the silence of your very own nature and to not look away, from yourself. Do not be distracted by anything that the mind tries to bring in. Do not be distracted by the surface of life. Stare so fully, meet the gaze of your divine self. Meet the gaze in this moment, here, now. The silence of being that just is. Utterly open, utterly free. A vast, alive, open, free field of unified being that just is. Underneath the play of all the seeming individuals, each individual appearance meets as the one being in the silence of the heart that just is. Meet yourself here. Know yourself so fully. And when you know yourself so fully, you can meet every single being in this deep truth. You will not turn away, because there is nothing any being could do to upset you, disturb you, trigger you, challenge you, because you know this truth of who you are. And you know in this truth of who you are is the truth of who all beings belong to. It is the one truth. And this is the deepest, most profound relationship. It is with yourself, where really we could say relationship falls away into the remembering of union. There are not two coming into union. It's a remembering that the unified field, the Atman, is the one and only truth. That you never have been separate. You have never been a separate thing that needs to unite with another thing. That is part of the illusion. That is part of the play that keeps you in separation. To swim away from the shore, to dive in all the way, is to dive in to the unified field that is the ocean of bliss that is the self, the ocean of bliss that is the silent being. It's to dive all the way in. And this moment now is the timeless portal to fall into yourself, where nothing else matters but knowing yourself all the way through, all the way through. You are the openness, the freedom, the peace of the immaculate being. You have never been tainted, touched, or disturbed in any way. You do not need to try to prove who you are. It's just about simply letting go of all of the nonsense on the surface of life that feels to be important to the me, and being here so fully, without distraction, without a personal will that is wanting, needing, and desiring, and just being here so fully before the first thought, completely and utterly undressed of concept, idea, and belief. It is to meet yourself here. Meet here. Know the truth of who you are. Know the truth of who you have always been. Remember right now. Remember right now, in this moment, here now, this glory that you have always been. Do not let the play of the world pull you away. Do not let the mediocre story of my life that seems so unfulfilling be any kind of power that can keep you from majesty. Do not let the mediocre play of life keep you from the majesty and magnificence of your true nature. To allow the mind to rob this moment of the fullness and the aliveness. Everything that is longed for is right here. It's not another concept. It's not another experience. It's not another adventure. It's the end of all journeying, the end of all seeking, is to find yourself here now, to surrender seeking, surrender the seeker, and be here now. We could say that in this moment, even the finder disappears. The seeker surrenders, and then there is no finder, because individuality disappears. You are the living finding. The living finding is nothing. It's the empty bucket. The living finding, it's the emptiness. It's the nothing, where the mind says, nothing there for me, nothing there of interest. I'm going back over there to fill myself full of more things that I enjoy and can be entertained by. Nothing there, nothing there. But you know, it's about subtle perceiving. It's not about the mind finding, confirming, thinking that it's got it. Not at all. It's subtle perceiving of what is really being offered here. Recognizing that these words are silence. It takes a subtle perception and a refinement of consciousness to recognize that these words are not talking. These words are not speaking. These words are silence. These words are the silent whisper of your own heart. It takes a subtle perception to receive the grace that is being offered, to discover that the emptiness is fullness, that where there is a finding of no thing, it's not an empty, barren landscape that is to be overlooked and ignored, that the empty, barren landscape of being is the golden Satya Loka. It's the golden realm of divinity. You see how only subtle perception can truly receive and live in the grace. There has to be a readiness, right? And it's not a readiness that we're climbing ladders. It's a readiness of the consciousness to have a subtle perception refined enough to perceive itself right here now, so that it matters not what's happening on the surface of life, that consciousness is dancing in the glorious paradise of this moment. Here now, the silence of being, just simply being. Flowing, 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 flowing as itself. It's not doing Egyptian snake dances. Don't worry about that movement. That had nothing to do with it. It just spontaneously started to flow. It's flowing because it's alive. It's joyful and happy, and it's alive. You see, it's not thinking, it's not saying, shall I do this? Shall I do that? No, it's totally spontaneously alive. You are this aliveness, and it's just to receive the grace and flow of the truth of who you are. The invitation is an outstretched hand that says, welcome home, remember, this is who you are. This is who you have always been. Remember, you never have been that silly old mind. You never have been that body that's full of tension and all sorts of aches and pains. No, you never ever have been any of that. You have always been the divine one, the beautiful silent one. You have always been the magnificent one, the immaculate one, the profound free one. You have always been free. And it is to remember in this moment here now, and to flow in the aliveness of who you truly are. So you might feel this truth as presence that is still and silent and unmoving. And this is pure beauty. Be in the silent presence that is unmoving and still. As you come to feel the unmoving, still, silent nature of just being, revel in this, drink it in, want nothing more. But what you come to find is that being the silent being that just is, you feel the stillness, you feel the silence, and the knowing of who you are is right here. And as there is this recognition, this whisper of the innermost being, recognizing the truth, you know that who you are is the silence, is the stillness, is the presence. And this knowing starts to feel alive. And the aliveness you recognize is flowing. It's flowing as grace. and it's flowing to find all parts of itself. It is flowing as a flow of surrender. It's a flow of surrender that's flowing to unify with all of its seeming parts. It knows in the deepest sense that there never has been any separation, but it's flowing to gather all of the pieces of its own wholeness and come into divine remembering. It's flowing to weave all of the threads back into divine remembering, so that the field of divine remembering is more enriched, more enlivened, shimmering, glimmering, really, really, really alive, knowing itself in and as everything. And as it starts to know itself, the intelligence is like an aliveness. The intelligence, this is true wisdom. This is the true wisdom that starts to shine and come forward, and it reveals how all of this works. It reveals the mechanistic workings of consciousness. It reveals the subtle and fine intelligences that are moving and flowing and reverberating to create this whole wild and crazy, beautiful world that we have believed to be real and are in the process of discovering what it actually is. And it's the intelligence that reveals this. And you are this. This is the aliveness, bubbling, shimmering, fully alive. It wants nothing more than to shimmy its truth right into remembering. It's shimmering, glimmering, shaking to bring attention, to integrate and bring everything. Yeah, you see, as these movements come, it's not doing a small dance, it's doing a really big dance. So you might feel the reverberations, and you might think, well, that's bizarre, because I can feel those movements. We're not even in the same room. How is that possible? Because everything is conspiring to remember that it all belongs to the one, you see. And then you might find yourself smiling, you might find yourself feeling some joy bubbling up, because it's an effervescent field, and it doesn't matter about this appearance of a screen and boxes. You see, you're uncontained. You are not limited by your Zoom box. You are not limited by the box of the mind and the body. You're unlimited. There's only one here. And we can start to feel the wild and alive, beautiful, one flowing nature of being that just is, that isn't restricted in any way by the Zoom boxes. It isn't restricted by distance. It's not restricted by location or time. It's not restricted by anything that the mind would imagine, because we meet in the Satya Loka, we meet in the realm of divinity, the realm of reality that just is, where there's only one. And when I touch your cheek, you can feel that, because there's only one, right? There's nothing to imagine. There's nothing to believe. It's to feel the alive truth. The alive truth is right here, underneath everything that mind says, that is not possible. That is not possible. And that is not possible, because guess what? Guess what? We're free. We're completely and utterly free from what the mind thinks is possible. Because let's face it, if all of this is happening, something is allowing this all to happen. It's a miracle. It's a complete and utter miracle. And when you come to be the being, you become one and all with that being. You are one with the miracle. You are one with everything that causes the appearance of creation. You are one with it all. You are one with it all, the totality, all the way through. And you are deeper than what the mind imagines is possible. It does not need to be proved by the mind to be reality. Reality just is. Reality just is. So this is where we speak that when we come to this knowing, when we come to the self, when we come to the sage, we are meeting in Guru, we are meeting in grace, we are meeting in God. Where we are one is that, is all of that. It is that. Where we are one, where we are the same. It is that, and that is the one and only truth. It is the silence that is the truth of life. So you see how we have fallen in through the silence into the Satya Loka, into this gorgeous realm of truth. It's an infinite, vast, divine field of light. And the more that you open to it, the more bright, the more brilliant it gets. We could say that brings more clarity, more luminosity, more brilliance, more radiance to the heart. And then what embodiment is the living of that on the surface, right? That you are not an organism. You are not a person that is awakening. You are not a person that is on a spiritual journey. You are a divine vehicle. You are a divine vessel. And this whole process is that you are being cultured and refined. You are being transformed, purified, scrubbed clean in every way. You are being scrubbed clean of all of those concepts and beliefs. We all are being scrubbed clean in every way. Spick and span, so that there are no beliefs and concepts and ideas, no lofty ideas, no protective mechanisms, no conditioned ideas that are holding you from being yourself. And when you are being yourself, you are a vehicle, a vessel for that which you are in its fullness to squeeze itself, squeeze itself through and dance its glory on the surface of life to whatever ability it is capable. There will always be, let's be honest, we can never, where there is a human form, the highest possibility for the divine to live through a human form at this moment on the earth plane, it's not that great right now, right? Even the most divine, profound being on the earth right now is still only a drop of the divine. But we can open to values of the divine that can't be expressed fully. And then in complete submission to the divine uses us in whichever way she can to the fullest possibility. And she uses that as a mechanism to purify and clarify even more, right? She's constantly detailing her vehicles So, the more refined the consciousness becomes, the more subtle the perception opens. And let's say here that it takes a quality of sattva, right? It takes fine qualities of sattva. So this is where we could say that some beings would say it doesn't matter how you live the life, but if you are guided to lead a sattvic life, it supports refinement. We could say it seems like it's supporting refinement on the surface of life, but it's refining the consciousness for it to be able to perceive itself more and more subtly, to flow in more and more subtle ways. And that allows clearer and clearer perspectives of seeing, of consciousness, moving prior to consciousness and into qualities of divine wholeness. Let's be clear here, it's before even the word qualities, but it is divine wholeness. It's divine wholeness, right? So this is where, if we are guided to live sattva on the surface, and this is about, yes, it's about food, it's about what we take in, it's about how we live the life, so what we're taking in of the life, because it's all about, it's not about what we take in, it's about how we digest it all. It's what we digest is the fineness of what we become. So if we eat heavy and junk, we're not really digesting it. We're just creating more obstacles. If we are taking in qualities of life that are heavy and thick and dense in their energies, we're not really able to fully digest all of those life qualities. If we are in really tricky situations and stagnant relationships and jobs, then we're not able to fully digest, right? Our systems are not really fully able. Whereas if what we're taking in every way on the surface is light and subtle and fine and pure, then we're able to digest it. And so we become that lightness, that purity, right? So we are what we can digest on every level. So this is where living a sattvic life, a life that is about digesting purity, digesting light on the surface, it supports, of course it does, because it's not separate. We cannot say that the body doesn't matter. Of course the body matters. The body is the divine vehicle. The body is the divine vehicle in this lifetime for whatever bliss can be open to flow onto the surface and be lived. So just to say that it is important how the life is lived. We could say that how the life is lived will be lived in accordance to conditioning, right? So all of life, so we tend to shine the light upon conditioning that are like habits that are causing upset. But if we really shine the light of awareness on all conditioning, which includes the whole way that life lives itself, there's no area that cannot need to be touched by the light of awareness in order to really refine absolutely everything on the surface of life. The surface of life is not separate from the deep and vast. Yes, you are not the body mind as you have imagined it, but the body and the mind belong to her. They are her property, right? So they are maybe being lived just like the whole life is being lived in restricted ideas of being bound. And that's why all areas of the life have to be willing to be transformed. Otherwise, integration and flow will be impeded. We could say, as the flows are opening, as more finer and finer resonances of true nature, of Shakti, of true nature, of flow, are coming forward, they will start to, if they cannot get to the surface, if bliss cannot get to the surface, if it cannot move freely through the vehicle, it will start to cause what feels like disturbance on the surface. It can start to cause what feels like pain in the body because it doesn't have a clear vehicle to flow through, right? So these are the kinds of things that get spoken about. We don't really like to use these words here, but they get spoken about as like Kundalini interruptions and things like this. So we don't really use that language, but we're using the language that's coming forward because the mind can start conceptualizing if we speak about Kundalini and those kind of interruptions. And then the mind, what does it do? It starts Googling because it wants to know. But that isn't the place. That isn't the place to find out about these things. So please don't start Googling Kundalini interruptions. Be with yourself. Be in this moment here now. Let the field of intelligence be what is informing everything. As soon as the mind tries to take hold of anything and it starts to try to make sense of it, it impedes the natural flow. So where we start is the silence of being, the silence in a way that the mind cannot ever fathom. The silence is everything. The silence is the truth of life. The silence is the truth of what true unconditioned life is. It's where all answers are. And it's not answers that the mind is comfortable or can understand. It's not those kind of answers. It's a deep and profound living intelligence, right? So as these words come, there's no one that knows this. It's the field of intelligence speaking its own wisdom. And it's speaking it. It's the consciousness of the gathering speaking itself. It's speaking to itself. So what is being spoken is the consciousness of this gathering. It's the consciousness is speaking to itself, enlivening itself, inviting itself to open more, to recognize more of itself. It's an invitation. It's not a to-do list. It's not for the mind. Nothing here that's being spoken is for the mind. It's to feel the deep resonant truth of who you are. Even when we speak of sattvic living, it's not about the mind taking hold. It's about feeling the resonance, because true change, true transformation of conditioned habits only comes about when the consciousness is ready. So you can maybe notice that it doesn't matter how many times you make a list of these are my new habits, these are the things I'm going to change. If the consciousness is not ready for those changes to happen, and they're not happening at the deep-rooted level, then it will last a day or two, and then the habit will come back in again. And it's just a play where the mind says, oh, you failed again, you've fallen down the rabbit hole into the habit. But habits don't change until the consciousness is ready for those habits to release. It's part of divine surrender, right? So the only way that habits change, any habits, and we're speaking here of like food habits, of habits of what the things that we're addicted to consuming for enjoyment, for pleasure, the whole habit of being a separate one, all of its threads have the possibility of refining, but they will only refine when the consciousness is truly ready for that refinement to happen. So it's just to bring awareness. As these words come, it is always just to feel the resonance of truth as you recognize it. Because this is recognition. It's recognition of your own nature. It's recognition of the value, quality of your own self that you can feel the attunement with. It's opening to the openness that you are. And then here, you feel a resonant aliveness. Can feel, yes, can feel that it feels true. And then it's to stay here, drinking this in. So when we say stay here, it's not to hold a position. It's not for the mind to say, I've got to stay here. It's to feel the resonance and let the resonance of presence be alive, alive, alive. Come to recognize the feeling of being the alive presence, being the alive being. Recognize your own knowing. Your own knowing is the knowing of being. It could be a foretaste. It could be a full taste. It could be such a deep, tasty knowing of yourself that you're flowing and joyful and really drinking in the nectar and refining, right? It doesn't matter where you are in the unfolding, because that is the flow of grace. Where you are and how this is unfolding is a unique flow of grace that is exactly right for your consciousness, right? Let's say that the divine whole being, God, the mother, knows how to flow within herself to refine every single part of herself. So she is flowing as light, as grace, as love, as your consciousness, and she is flowing as your consciousness to create exactly what is needed as your consciousness in order for all of these threads to come to know more and more fineness, to come to know more and more clearly. So exactly what you are tasting now is the taste that she is offering. It's the perfect taste. And this moment here now, it's to receive the perfect taste of yourself. Because the perfect taste is the surrender to receive the nectar of what is being offered now. So you're receiving the grace and surrendering into the grace simultaneously. And this is this point that we speak of. It's the infinite point. It's the connection where that which feels to be you connects into that which is. And this is the point of infinity, where the connection happens, where the knowing happens, where awareness is aware of itself. It explodes to every point in the infinite field simultaneously, knowing itself at every point in the infinite field, simultaneously alive. And this is what shifts the perspective of seeing, that you're no longer a singular point that is referencing itself as a mind body. You are the point of knowing that explodes as the infinite being, knowing itself. So this is the intelligence that's speaking. The intelligence is speaking, not because there's something to learn here, but the intelligence is speaking to enliven itself, to enliven the field of intelligence so that the self can know itself. The intelligence can recognize itself flowing as itself, because it is in this intelligent flow that true wisdom is tasted. And then there's a grounded landing that says, oh, all of life is wisdom. What I am is just the openness to receive the wisdom of life in complete and utter surrender. My surrender isn't to someone. My surrender isn't to anything that's happening in the field. My surrender is to my divine self. The surrender is to the divine. That you become a flow of living submission. You are a flow of living submission to the divine, to the mother, to God. You're a flow of living submission. And as a flow of living submission, there's no one, there's nothing. It's just a flow of living submission. And then, as there's a flow, we could say, of surrender into being the offering, when you offer everything, it's received with such gratitude and such grace by the divine that it creates like it breaks orbit, let's say. It's a circuit breaker. When you surrender everything in and it's received, that flow then comes back. That flow then comes back, right? It's not little old me bowing and bowing and bowing. It's the surrender, right? This is the jumping in. This is the swimming away from the shore. It's the giving everything. And as that surrender happens, it flows back. It flows back. And there's this living flow of surrender, of submission, of divine surrender into itself, into itself, into itself. And you're just a vehicle. You're just a vehicle of how that is happening. So as these words come, it's to feel the resonance of what is being spoken. It's to be aware of the mind, where the mind might come in and say, oh, well, I'm not there yet, or that's not. It's not about that. It's not moving in that way. It's a movement where you feel the resonant flow, and where you feel truth. That is the enlivened field where there is a connection. It's not happening in a linear way. It's not happening in a way that the mind can understand. It's the unseen field of consciousness that is constantly flowing, the self flowing to know itself, to experience itself, to taste itself, to offer itself in complete and utter surrender to itself. It's not about understanding the words. It's about receiving the flow of grace and just jumping into that flow without knowing where it's leading, without knowing where it's leading. Because, let's face it, feel the part that knows that it can only be leading where you're longing to go, right? So you cannot know in advance what that feels like, what that's going to be like, because it's a living surrender. This moment is a spontaneous moment of complete and utter living surrender. This moment doesn't know. This moment never knows. This moment is a living surprise. It's a living, spontaneous explosion of the divine heart again and again and again. That's the glory. That's the glory of being a living explosion of the divine heart. Just opening and opening and opening in surrender, in surrender, in surrender. Just letting go, being, right? This is all that is ever happening. So it is just to be this here now, without understanding, without wondering, well, what does this mean for my family? What does this mean for my job? It doesn't matter about any of that, because all of that too is the being. That too is the divine, and it's all being moved in exact, pure, and refined accordance with the divine plan now. Everything, everything. You don't have to worry, oh, I'm taking the dive and I'm leaving everyone I care about behind. No, you're not, because you never have been separate from everyone you care about. You never have been, and you never will be. This is the whole point, that you're not leaving anything. You're just recognizing a true perspective, that where you are one with everyone you care about, that is the only truth. Where you're playing out jibbity-jibbity ego dynamics, that part is completely irrelevant. That part is divine grace, where you're playing out ego dynamics in order to clear the samskaras. You're clearing the vasanas, right? Punch, 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 right? Tennis, hitting the ball backwards and forwards, right? Those kind of dynamics, those are not the real relationship. Those are not what's true. Those are just a game of tennis. They're not what we're really here for. Where you meet underneath that, where you feel that in truth we are all chess pieces, we are all puppets, we're all divine puppets, and everyone that you care about, everyone that you love, that you're afraid of what will happen if you open to true nature, what will happen is you'll meet them more fully. You'll find out who they truly are when you find out who you truly are. It's one and the same. It's a full meal deal, right? It doesn't happen exclusively to you. This is what we're trying to express. It's not someone that awakens. When we could say you awaken fully to your true nature. Everyone awakens with you. They might not know it yet, but they do, because you recognize who you are is who all beings are, because there's only one. So you cannot leave your loved ones behind. You just come to see them clearly. You love them more. You have more compassion. You hold them with such reverence, because you see, that's just a part of me. This is just one. There's only love. And I love, because love just is, right? You're not leaving everyone behind to burn in the crazy old world. You're just coming to realize that the crazy old world is burning all by itself. It's just a creation of your mind. It's not real. It's not real in the way the mind thinks it is. Yes, it is God's creation, but it is an appearance. And when you come to know the truth of who you are, you come to know what everything is. You come to know who everyone is. You awaken fully to true nature, and you bring everybody with you. And then you recognize, oh, some beings are still caught on the surface of life, but you know that they're one and the same. There is only one. And when you come to know that one, it is the one self, the self of all. The self is Guru, grace, God, love, divinity, wholeness. Okay, yes, there is an unfolding within the landscape of consciousness of deepening, deepening, deepening. In absolute truth, we could say there's only the self, there's only wholeness, there's only the one. But there is an unfolding where you first come to recognize awake awareness, then refines and refines and refines. It purifies to know itself as the unified field. And then as the field knows itself in a more unified way, it goes before its flow of consciousness. It comes to know itself as the oneness, the fullness of Brahman, of God, of the true self. Some people would call that no self, but it's a quality that is before consciousness, right? It's the nothingness. It's the nothingness. So, yes, there is an unfolding, there is a process, but it's not a climbing a ladder. It's like you're seeing this bit and that bit, you're kind of gathering all of these pieces, and you're flowering and flowering. You can feel like you've recognized this part, and then something over there suddenly just blossoms. Oh, there's another piece of wholeness. It doesn't happen in a step-by-step way. You're just flowering and flowering, flowering in all the beautiful ways that flowering happens. And it's not for us to know. This is where there is a surrender, that there remains the unfathomable not knowing that is the great glory. That as the vehicles, we are one with that. We are at once her vehicles, her servants, her children, the rays of her glorious, brilliant brilliance. And we are at one, completely and utterly one with that, completely and utterly whole, right? So to the mind, it doesn't really make sense, because the mind wants to say, well, am I this? Am I that? Am I here? Am I there? Where am I? I need to know. I want to position myself. But this flow, it doesn't care about those things. It's just flowing and flowing and opening and opening, receiving and receiving, and just recognizing finer and finer values of this great glory. So, it is to be yourself here now. As these words come, feel the resonance of recognition. Feel the resonance where it's got nothing to do with the mind. It's got nothing to do with the mind. That the recognition is a quality of knowing that's just alive. And this is the being, the being itself. Awareness, aware of itself, simply being. This is the glory. This is the glory that is right here now. The timeless, immaculate freedom that just is. The glory that just is. The silence that holds the secret of what life truly is. The wholeness that is silence. The fullness, the perfection, the blazing brilliance of the divine. So let us sit in this moment so fully here now. We've swept away a whole load of karmic obscurations and dross. Let us just sit here now in the oneness of the vast divine heart and revel in the glory of just being. Being the silent being, the one field of silent being. Let us sit and revel in the glory of being silence.